Hey guys, so we are going to try and go over the next couple sections in the chapter 1. We'll start with section 1.3, a function of human life, and try and see how far we can get in this video, and then we'll do the last two sections in a separate video. So let's keep going. So in section 1.3, it is talking about human life, and the study of life is going to be biology. I hope we all know what that term is biology is the study of life. So living things, what makes something a living thing? Well, to be alive, everything that is alive has certain properties that we mentioned in the previous video. So let's talk about those different properties. So I've got a picture here of different living things that I took of me many moons ago when my husband and I had just gotten engaged. Um, Properties of life. I have a picture behind me of living stuff. This is Max Patch up in North Carolina, and I went there last weekend hiking that Appalachian Trail, and it is gorgeous. And you can see all the plant life in that picture there. All the plants, all the animals, all the things that we consider alive have certain characteristics. So, what are those characteristics that you need to know? Well, they need to be able to respond to their environment. They need to be able to recognize changes and sense them. So if I am a teeny tiny bacteria, I still need to be able to know, oh, if I'm a photosynthetic bacteria, here is light, and over here there's not any light. So if I'm photosynthetic and I use it to make my energy, I'm going to go over this way to make light. Or maybe there is a toxic chemical in the water and I need to get away from it. So I need to be able to sense those things. Can I sense them? I need to be responsive. If I put my hand down on a hot stove, I need to be able to sense that stuff and respond. So responsiveness. I need to be able to adapt. Again, we talk about what happens when you get hot and what happens when you get cold, right? Your body is able to change depending on what's going on. So you can change your behavior. If I'm cold, I'm going to go put on a sweatshirt. My kid who lives in hoodies is going to go put on his hoodie. Change your behavior. If I was that bacteria that likes light and uses it, I'm going to swim on over to go towards the light versus the dark. So I need to be able to adapt to change. I need to be able to grow and develop. Every living thing needs to be able to reproduce and grow. So whether that's a bacteria growing a new bacteria via binary fission, where it literally copies itself, splits itself in half, and boom, there's a new bacteria. It has to be able to grow. Whether it is a teeny tiny little kitten or a puppy or a little baby plant out there, it needs to be able to grow and develop into a full-grown adult version of whatever it is that that organism is. It needs to be able to reproduce. We said, biologically speaking, you are successful if you have passed on your genes. If you didn't pass on your genes in the realm of biology, that's not success. You need to be able to move, at least if you're not physically moving, because, the oak tree in my yard is not moving. It stays in the same place, but it still can distribute materials throughout itself. It can move things within itself. So it's going to pull the water that is raining down from the thunderstorm right now from the ground up through its roots into its vascular system, into its xylem, and pull that water up and distribute it throughout the plant. So movement, locomotion, either moving around in its environment or moving things within itself. Respiration, circulation, digestion, excretion. These are all things that, as a multicellular organism that we have different systems. Stop it. Sorry, I told y'all I have lots of animals, and my pitty is here making the recording with me, and she's moving my camera. So we have, as a multicellular organism, body systems that control this. And we just talked about all the body systems in the last video. If you're a unicellular organism, you may definitely not have an entire system that does this, but your tiny little teeny tiny body still needs to be able to exchange gases that you're using for cellular respiration. You need to be able to get things from one side of your body to the other side of your body, whether you are using a complicated system like our circulatory system, or maybe you're just using the simple process of diffusion to get things from one side to the other, but it's got to be able to get to one side or the other. You need to be able to handle your nutrition. What is your energy source? Whether those are organic or inorganic, how are you getting your energy? You need to be able to handle that. And then you need to get your wastes out of your body. We have an excretory system. We talked about kidneys filter the blood, and then you're going to take that waste, store it in the bladder, and then eventually get rid of those wastes with your excretory system. Everything that's alive is producing waste, and they need to have a way to get it out, whether it's a complicated excretory system or simply voiding it out with exocytosis, but somehow they need to get rid of the waste. So all of these, everything that is alive does all of these things, is able to perform all of these functions. So some things that are sort of kind of alive are viruses. They have some of these characteristics, but not all the characteristics. So viruses are not technically alive because they cannot perform all of these things. So these are characteristics of life. Everything that's alive does this. We have a picture here of marathon runners, and they are right. They are sensing their environment. They are feeling the elevation change if they are staying flat or if they have to run up a hill. They are feeling the heat of the sun on their body. Their body is getting hot. They are moving their muscles, which exercising is going to make them hot. So you can see that these runners are sweating. At least I can see that this guy in the lead here is kind of glowing. So I'm assuming he's sweating. And so that is helping their body adapt to the change, that they are hot and they need to cool their body down. We're going to talk about homeostasis and keeping that steady state. Metabolism is something else that's also discussed. We're going to discuss it in AP2, but everything needs energy in some form, whether you're taking in that energy in the form of light or chemicals. You're a phototroph, you're an autotroph, a photoautotroph, or you are a chemoheterotroph, or you're taking in chemical food that way. We are chemoheterotrophs, by the way. You have to have a way to break that stuff down, and then you can build up other materials. So we're going to bring in glucose because we need sugar. We're going to break down that sugar, and we're going to break those bonds, and we're going to create different molecules using the energy harvested from breaking the bonds in glucose. And we're going to transform that energy into something else, and we're going to harvest that energy as ATP. And so when we break down things, we're going to have catabolism. When we build things back up into a different molecule, we have anabolism. And both of those together, breaking molecules down and building molecules back up, is considered metabolism. So some people have a very fast metabolism, and some people have a slower metabolism. The older you get, the slower your metabolism is. The younger you are, the faster it goes. There is also diseases that affect your metabolism. The thyroid, we talked about endocrine gland, your endocrine system. Your thyroid gland is producing hormones that can speed up or slow down your metabolism system. Requirements for human life. Let's go through those really fast. For us as humans, we definitely need oxygen. We are aerobic respirators. When we go into cellular respiration, we most definitely need oxygen to go past that anaerobic stage of glycolysis and into stages 2 and 3 that happen in the mitochondria, that happen under cellular respiration. We'll go into that in another chapter. We for sure need oxygen as part of our requirements. If we are deprived of oxygen, that will lead to cell death. We need other nutrients. We need macromolecules that we're going to discuss in the future chapters. We need carbs. Carbs are our friend. Sugars are our friend. We need lipids, fats. We need proteins. We need nucleic acids. We need those. We track those. We need nutrients. Whether those are organic compounds like the ones I just listed, or inorganic compounds like water, and other vitamins and minerals, we need nutrients. We have a pretty narrow range of temperatures that we can survive in. And if we get too hot or too cold, both leads to death if we are outside of the range of temperatures. So we could be hyperthermic, where we talk about those marathon runners and they're getting really hot, so they're going to sweat and try and cool their body down. You don't want to be hyper. Hyper means too much. And we're going to go over those terminology words that you're going to need, and you're going to need to know all those words on the outlines, by the way. Know them, love them. We'll talk about those words for the rest of anatomy and physiology. But hyper is too much. Hypo is too low. So my son is ADHD. He has attention deficit hyperactivity. He's got lots of hyperactivity. He's got lots of energy. So hyper is a lot. Hypo is not enough. Hypothermia is too cold. Your body is too cold. And you need to warm back up. Both of these conditions, hyperthermia, hypothermia, can lead to death. And then atmospheric pressure. We have a range of atmospheric pressure, stop it, that we can survive in. We can't go too low in the pressure, and we can't go too high either. So we wouldn't survive at the bottom of the ocean, for example. That is way too much pressure, and it would absolutely crush our tiny little human bodies. If we tried to survive at the bottom of the ocean, we couldn't make it. So those are requirements for human life. We cannot withstand harsh conditions for very long. Just like if we were trying to climb Mount Everest, you can't just hang out up there at the top of the Everest. You can't make it. Those are very harsh conditions, and they are not hospitable for us. We wouldn't make it. We can't survive in very, very hot conditions exposed without doing something about it, without covering ourselves up and making sure we're hydrated and all of that good stuff. The last section I want to talk about in this video is homeostasis. It is a term that I need y'all to know. What it means is steady state. Steady state. So we were talking about these ranges, right? We've got a certain range of temperature. We've got a certain range of pressure that we need to stay in that boundary. With homeostasis, you're going to stay in a steady state. We want you to stay somewhere around 98.6. And some people's temperature is not exactly 98.6. Maybe they're closer to lower end of 98 or maybe even 97. Different people's body temperature are different, but relatively speaking, we have a steady state around 98 that we want to maintain. We don't want to be too high and we don't want to be too low, because again, both of those things will lead to death. When we maintain that steady state, we're going to try and do something about that. So we'll talk about feedback involved in that. So homeostasis is the presence of a steady state, keeping a stable internal environment in this steady state. We're going to regulate this steady state by three major parts. So we're going to have some kind of sensor around our body. So we have sensors all over our body. We're going to talk about that when we get to nervous system and all the different types of receptors that take in information and then send it to you. So you're going to have some sort of sensor, and it's going to send information via the nervous system to your control system, your CNS, and then it's going to send out information to an effector and affect change. So with homeostasis, whether it is temperature, whether you're dehydrated, maybe your salt content is too high, or maybe your salt content is too low. Maybe your potassium is really high. My father-in-law was just dehydrated, and he went to the hospital yesterday because his blood pressure was really low and it was setting off his markers, and he needed to be monitored for a while. And it turns out that we got his fluids back in check and he was okay and he's home now. But we needed to maintain that steady state. And if things are out of whack, we need to be able to fix those. So if your sodium level, if you are hyponatremic and your sodium level is too low, that's not good. And we need to be able to bounce you back to get to your sodium levels in the normal range. Homeostasis, we got to keep it in check. We're going to talk about feedback. How do we bounce it back into those ranges? Well, there's two types of feedback. There is negative feedback and there is positive feedback. For the most part, in our bodies, almost everything, and we're going to talk about the two exceptions in a little bit, almost everything is negative feedback. What do we mean when we say negative feedback? Negative feedback is where you are moving away from your happy place. Whether your happy place is the 98.6 degree temperature, whether your happy place is, X degree of sodium per mil in your bloodstream, whatever that happy place is. My table doesn't want to sit still right now. Whatever that happy place is, we need to be able to maintain it. And if you have moved away from your happy place, there we go. So here's my happy place. If you have moved away from it with negative feedback, we're going to, here's our movement, we're going away, we're going away, we're going away. We want to negate that and we want to bring it back. So negative feedback is going to stop this movement away from your happy place, and you're going to come back to it. Negative feedback. You're moving away and you got to bring it back to this. So negative feedback, we have decided that we've got a sensor, it's going to the control and the effector, and our body temperature has exceeded 37 degrees Celsius. So 37 degrees Celsius, 98-ish degrees Fahrenheit. So we are getting too hot. How do we sense this? Well, we have sensors in our brain. So we've got the nerve cells in our skin and in our brain that are detecting, hey, we're getting really hot up in here. And so then we need a control. So it's going to go to our regulatory center in the brain, and the brain's going to process this. Oh, we're getting hot. We need to do something about it. And then we're going to send out a signal from the CNS, from the brain, that is an effector to effect change. So what do we do when we get too hot? We sweat. I see you. I'm going to take you out in just a second. I promise. We're going to sweat. We're going to sweat. That's one of the ways that we can help cool our bodies down and affect change. So this is a form of negative feedback. We were at 98. We sat in the sun for way too long, or we exercised, or whatever happened, and our body temperature got too hot, and we want to negate that movement and go back to the happy place. So this is negative feedback. Almost all of the reactions, if we're talking about feedback, is going to be negative feedback in the body. There are exceptions. Here's our homeostasis regulation example. Again, we were talking about getting too hot, and we're going to have our sensor, our control, where we're processing the information, and then effector. And we are going to sweat. We talked about sweating. We talked about one of the other things that happens when you get too hot is that your face gets really flush, right? Your cheeks get flush, you turn bright red. That's your blood flow going up to the surface of your skin, hoping to cool you down. So that's happening here. And then you can decrease your metabolism for your metabolic heat production. So when we talk about cellular respiration, we are going to break down the bonds of glucose. It releases energy. We're going to harvest some of that energy as ATP, and 60% of that reaction goes out as heat. So if we slow down our metabolism, slow it all down, that's going to be another thing that we can control to regulate our heat if we get too hot. So these are things if we're too hot over here. If we're too cold, we're going to pull that blood flow away from the surface of the skin. Bring it back to our core. Blood flow needs to go to the brain. Blood flow needs to stay in the core and make sure that the vital organs inside are okay. The blood flow going to the tip of my nose, I will lose my nose before I stop the blood flow going to my brain. So we're going to pull this blood flow away from the outside of the body. Stop it. Oh my goodness. Animals, I'm sorry. We're going to pull the blood flow away from the body when we're cold. Another thing that we mentioned already is shivering. The muscles contract. And when the muscles are firing and contracting like that, they release heat. So that helps us stay warm. And then another thing, increased metabolic heat production. So bringing in the food, breaking down the food, and causing those reactions to break things apart is releasing heat. So that's another way, if we are being able to regulate temperature with our homeostasis, staying in our steady state, our happy place of 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. It is not totally precise. Just like your thermostat, there is a small, little range of wiggle room. It's not just like, oh, I was 98.8 now. Now it's time to bust out all the guns and do all the things. It's okay if you're 98.8. If you're 104.8, that's a problem. So it's not totally going to kick off if it's just a little off. But if it becomes a bigger problem, then yes, it is definitely going to kick in, and we need homeostasis to have negative feedback and get everything back to its happy range, whether that is temperature, water, um, minerals, potassium, sodium, calcium, all those things have a range, and we need to maintain it with homeostasis. Exceptions to the rule. I said almost everything is negative feedback, where we went away from the happy place and we're negating that and going back. Positive feedback. There are two types of positive feedback. Both of these with positive feedback examples that we use in this class are going to be a stimulus happens. And once that stimulus starts, until the stimulus itself is stopped, the process will continue to go on. So we wouldn't want, if the body got hot, to continue that feedback and to just keep going. We want to stop that. Well, that we need negative feedback to do that. Positive feedback. Examples for positive feedback. There are two that we talk about in this class a lot. And so labor is one of those. Once labor begins in the human body, once the uterus becomes so stretched out and it is sending signals that this baby is fully developed and we are ready to go, and contractions start happening and mom goes into labor and oxytocin is going, that stimulus is going. And until mom delivers, that stimulus is still going to try and continue. It's going to be a positive feedback where it just keeps going and going and going and going until the stimulus stops. So until baby is born, that positive feedback is just going to keep going and feed on itself until the stimulus is stopped. Another example of positive feedback is blood clotting. Blood clotting. So you have a stimulus where a chemical is getting released, whether you have damaged the blood vessel and the chemical is coming from the outside and getting into the bloodstream because maybe you gave yourself a paper cut, um, or you have damage to the inside of your arteries because maybe you've got plaque formation and or you've got deep vein thrombosis, but something has caused damage to the inside of your blood vessel, and now we've started a cycle of clotting, and we will continue to clot until we stop that stimulus, until we have closed off the source, until we've clotted it out and the stimulus stops. So these are two examples of positive feedback where a stimulus starts and it will continue to go until we lose the stimulus. Blood clotting and childbirth are positive feedback. Everything else when we talk about feedback is gonna be negative feedback. We get away from the happy place and we need to bring it back. All right, that is going to conclude that part. We'll go into the next section of anatomical terms in the next video, and I'm going to go walk my dog before she loses it again.